Welcome back to another deep dive. We're really thrilled you could join us today because we're putting a magnifying glass over something that touches almost every single one of us at some point.
Yeah, it's a very universal issue.
It really is. And we're exploring a relationship killer today. But to be completely clear right out of the gate, we are not talking about those dramatic, screaming matches in the rain.
Right, no movie moments here.
Exactly. We're not talking about those explosive cinematic betrayals you see on television. We are talking about a quiet, creeping, almost invisible death. We're talking about control.
And the source material we're using today provides just a really phenomenal lens on how this slow fade actually happens. We're drawing heavily from insights found in the book, Talking Won't Fix It.
Which is such a great title.
It is, yeah. It's written by an author who founded a personal development organization called NAVORES.
And before we get into the heavy lifting of the behavioral science here, there's actually a fascinating linguistic side note for you. I was looking through the materials and realized the author's first name, Marcus, his last name, Sieg, and the name of his organization, NAVORES. These all actually originate from the German language.
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't caught that.
Yeah. It's just a brilliant little detail regarding how language and culture kind of intersect with the rigid frameworks we're about to discuss. But moving past the linguistics, the core concepts from NAVORES are what really anchor our entire analysis today.
They do. And we should probably set the parameters for what NAVORES actually studies. What's fascinating here is that they are not dealing in standard pop psychology.
Right.
They aren't sitting around categorizing personality types or unpacking your childhood trauma. They focus entirely on biologically rooted mechanisms.
The physical stuff.
Exactly. They are looking at the hardwired physiological responses that shape how human beings behave, how we interact, and specifically how our communication completely mutates when our nervous systems are put under pressure.
Okay, let's unpack this because those sources challenge our basic preconceived notions entirely.
They really turn them upside down.
Because when you hear the word control in the context of a relationship, a very specific image probably pops into your head. You picture a villain.
A tyrant.
Right. You picture a manipulator whose primary conscious goal is to overpower their partner. But the genesis of control, this stealthy relationship killer we're talking about, it does not begin with a lust for power. It begins with something much more ordinary. It begins with pressure.
We have to completely dismantle that myth of the power-hungry, mustache-twirling controller. Control, at least in the biological context we're exploring today, begins when a person's inner orientation starts to collapse.
Inner orientation. Let's define that for the listener.
So inner orientation is your neurobiological baseline. It's your internal compass, your sense of groundedness, and your fundamental feeling of safety in your own skin at any given moment.
When you feel secure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When you have a stable inner orientation, your prefrontal cortex, which is the logical, empathetic part of your brain, is firmly in the driver's seat. You can handle unpredictability. You can handle a messy day.
But how does that internal compass actually break down in real life? Like, if someone is just having a highly stressful week at work or dealing with a sudden financial strain, does that really trigger the kind of biological panic you're talking about?
It absolutely can, depending on the individual's allostatic load.
Which is the accumulated stress.
Right. It's essentially the cumulative wear and tear on the body from chronic stress. When that pressure hits a critical threshold, internal security just vanishes. The brain's amygdala detects a threat to survival, even if the threat is just a looming deadline or an emotionally ambiguous conversation with a partner.
The brain can't tell the difference.
It cannot. Biologically, when human beings lose their internal sense of predictability, the nervous system shifts into a sympathetic state. Fight or flight. We panic.
That makes me think of a conceptual model we can use here. Imagine being in an earthquake.
Okay, I like that.
If you're standing in your living room and suddenly the floor underneath you starts violently shaking, you completely lose your physical orientation. Your inner ear can't find balance.
Right. You're totally destabilized.
So what's the immediate instinctual reaction? You reach out and grab onto the heaviest piece of furniture you can find. You anchor yourself to a solid oak table or a door frame. You use something external to simulate the stability you've lost internally.
That conceptual model translates perfectly to the psychological and biological reality of stress. When a person cannot find security inside their own nervous system, they instinctively use external elements to simulate it.
They grab the oak table.
Exactly. But in a relationship, the oak table is control. They grab onto decisions. They force structured, rigid conversations. They impose strict rules or demand immediate answers from their partner. All of those external structures become that heavy furniture they are clinging to while their internal world is shaking.
I can actually relate to this. I remember a period a few years ago where my workload was absolute chaos, and I found myself intensely micromanaging a simple weekend getaway with my partner.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I was drafting color-coded itineraries and getting visibly agitated if we deviated from the schedule by even 10 minutes. And the thing is, I wasn't trying to be a tyrant. I was just so overwhelmed internally that I needed the external world to be perfectly predictable.
You were using the environment to stop the shaking.
Yes.
And this leads to a profound shift in how our relationship operates. In a healthy, regulated state, the focus of a partnership is on perception and connection. It relies on curiosity. But when that inner orientation collapses and biological panic sets in, the new priorities become clarity, order, and absolute certainty.
Because ambiguity is the enemy.
Exactly. Ambiguity is no longer tolerated in any form.
It's so crucial for you, the listener, to realize that this intolerance for ambiguity isn't born out of malice. It is a desperate biological imperative for stability. Ambiguity feels like another tremor in the earthquake. Things have to be defined immediately. Situations must be resolved right this second, or the controller's nervous system cannot downregulate.
Which naturally brings us to how this internal state mutates outward behavior. When the nervous system's priority shifts to absolute certainty, normal conversations change entirely. They stop being open exchanges of ideas.
Right, they become something else.
According to the source material, conversations become what is termed instruments of regulation.
Instruments of regulation. That phrase completely redefines what is happening between two people. If a conversation is an instrument of regulation, people aren't talking to share an experience. They're talking to define reality.
Yes.
They aren't explaining how they feel. They are explaining in order to stabilize their own heart rate.
The function of language fundamentally changes. They might be arguing, but they aren't arguing to reach mutual understanding. They are arguing to systematically organize their environment and cover up their own internal insecurity.
It's a defense mechanism.
It looks like communication on the surface, words are being exchanged, but underneath, it is a biological system using speech to desperately regain control of its surroundings.
Let me push back on that for a second, though. How is this different from just being an articulate, decisive partner? If I tell my partner that we need to sit down and finally map out our monthly budget, am I regulating my own anxiety? Or am I just being a responsible adult doing math?
The difference lies in the physiological markers and the presence of curiosity. Collaborative problem solving involves a dialogue. There is space for the other person's input, and the nervous system remains relatively calm if the partner suggests a different approach.
It's about flexibility.
Yes. When a conversation is an instrument of regulation, it functions more like a monologue delivered at the partner. There is a rigid lack of curiosity. If the partner suggests an alternative budget strategy, the controller experiences a cortisol spike, viewing the alternative not as an idea, but as a direct threat to the structure they are trying to build.
I want you to think about this for a second. Have you ever been in a conversation with someone where it felt like they weren't actually talking to you?
We've all been there.
Right. You realize very quickly that you're just a sounding board they're using to aggressively organize their own reality. You offer a mild perspective and they immediately correct it or rigidly redefine what you actually meant. Your input isn't welcome unless it perfectly aligns with the blueprint they're mentally drawing.
And the really wild part, the person using the conversation to regulate themselves is almost always entirely unaware that they're doing it. This brings up one of the most fascinating ironies in the source material. To the person exhibiting this controlling behavior, they do not feel like a dictator.
It's a bizarre paradox. You're effectively acting like a localized tyrant in your living room, but internally, your logic is telling you that your actions are completely necessary.
You feel deeply responsible.
Exactly. You probably feel like you're the only mature adult in the room keeping everything from falling apart.
If we connect this back to the bigger picture of their neurobiology, the sympathetic nervous system is screaming at them to fix the environment or face catastrophe. They genuinely believe that if they do not impose this rigid structure, chaos will consume the relationship.
The hero complex kicks in.
Totally. They step in,
Yeah.
they clarify things, they force the decisions, and every time they successfully impose order, They get a small dopamine hit that temporarily relieves their anxiety.
They think they're building a sturdy shelter for the relationship, but they are completely blind to the fact that they are actually building a cage. They are using the relationship as an external life support system for their own internal anxiety.
Because it feels so biologically justified to them, it is incredibly difficult for them to perceive the damage they are causing. They feel protective. They do not realize they are sucking all the oxygen out of the room.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We have spent a lot of time dissecting the internal earthquake of the controller, but we have to flip the perspective. What is the physical and emotional reality for the partner on the receiving end?
It's tough.
As the controller's internal pressure rises, the relationship itself starts to tighten. The squeeze begins.
That squeeze is palpable. As the controller's need for regulation increases, their ability to tolerate different perspectives evaporates entirely. Remember, difference equals ambiguity, and ambiguity equals danger to an unstable nervous system.
It's a threat.
To the controller, innocent questions from their partner start to feel highly disruptive. Mild disagreement feels like a direct, threatening attack.
If you're white-knuckling that heavy oak table during the earthquake we talked about, and your partner casually walks by and says, "Hey, why are you holding the table like that? Wouldn't it be better to stand in the doorway?"
Yeah, you're not going to be calm.
You aren't going to engage in a calm debate about seismic safety protocols. You are going to snap at them because you are holding on for dear life, and their question feels like they are trying to pry your fingers off the wood.
Because of that heightened threat response, what begins as a stated desire for clarification mutates into strict expectation. The dialogue turns to constant correction. The controller requires the partner to fall in line with our highly specific version of reality so that their nervous system can stay calm.
The partner suddenly finds themselves in an exhausting position where they are expected to constantly align. They have to endlessly explain themselves over and over, not to reach a place of deep understanding, but simply to keep the controller from spiraling.
It becomes a full-time job.
It does. The partner's primary role unconsciously shifts from being a loved equal to being a biological stabilizer for the other person's anxiety.
And from the outside, looking from the partner's perspective, this does not feel like the safe, organized structure the controller believes they are providing. It feels entirely like restriction. The security that the controller is trying to build is only simulated. It is never actually experienced by the partner.
It feels exactly like walking on eggshells. The inherent flexibility of healthy relationship completely vanishes. You lose the spontaneous joy. You lose the openness to just let things be a little messy or undefined.
Everything is scheduled.
You cannot just have a lazy Sunday morning where plans are up in the air because the controller's nervous system requires them to know exactly what time breakfast is, exactly what the errands are, and exactly what the tone of the morning will be in order to feel safe.
The loss of that flexibility is the beginning of the end. This brings us to the core tragedy synthesized in the source material. Control can absolutely force decisions, it can organize processes, and it can map out the logistics of a shared life with ruthless efficiency. What it can never do is create real inner stability. It only covers up the absence of it.
You cannot spreadsheet your way to psychological safety.
That's a great way to put it.
The underlying anxiety, that collapsed inner orientation, is still sitting right there. Is just hiding behind a meticulously organized Google Calendar and a series of highly regulated, tightly controlled conversations.
The long-term effects of this pattern, if left unaddressed, are grim. If this biological panic response isn't recognized for what it is, the relationship becomes entirely rigid.
Which is incredibly deceptive to the outside world. On paper, everything might look perfectly functional. It looks like the illusion of a well-oiled machine.
The perfect couple.
Right. The bills are paid, the house is clean, the arguments are quickly shut down through forced clarity. From a distance, it looks like success.
But underneath that shiny functional surface, the relationship no longer carries any emotional life. The closeness that once existed becomes completely conditional. The connection is entirely dependent on the partner agreeing, aligning, and never introducing ambiguity into the system.
Communication stops being about intimacy. It becomes purely mechanical. You're exchanging data points, not feelings. You're passing status reports back and forth just to maintain the operational baseline, but you're no longer sharing your internal worlds.
The most tragic part of this quiet death is that the controller remains entirely oblivious. They still feel that profound sense of responsibility. They truly believe they are keeping the relationship alive by managing it so tightly. In reality, the relationship is silently suffocating from the lack of air, flexibility, and genuine connection.
So what does this all mean for us? Let's zoom out and summarize the ultimate takeaway from these sources. Control is not strength. It is not leadership. It is not being the responsible adult in the room.
No, it's not.
Control, at its core, is merely a biological attempt to compensate for inner instability by forcing external structure onto your environment and your partner. It drains a living, breathing system of its life force, replacing deep, authentic connection with cold, rigid mechanics. It's the stealthy, quiet killer that doesn't need a massive explosion to destroy a relationship. It just slowly, methodically turns off the oxygen.
This raises an important question, and it's something I really want you to mull over. If our urge to control our relationships is fundamentally just a biological reaction to our own internal instability, could the ultimate relationship skill actually be learning how to sit comfortably with ambiguity, chaos, and the unknown without immediately trying to fix it?
That is a deeply provocative thought to end on. Just learning to stand in the earthquake, feeling the ground shake without grabbing onto your partner and demanding they make it stop.
Exactly.
We cannot thank you enough for joining us today to explore this incredible material. It completely rewrites the way we look at our daily interactions and the hidden forces driving them. We hope you take this, reflect on it, and always keep exploring the why behind human behavior. See you next time.